There's a certain kind of ache that comes with being alone, an ache that, whether we realize it or not, often marks the beginning of shadow work. Not the kind that throbs in your body, but one that settles deep in your soul. It's not something you can see or touch, but you feel it like a shadow trailing you. It doesn't seem natural. In fact, it feels like a flaw in the blueprint of life itself. After all, we're born into a world teeming with people, with voices, with connection. So why does it so often feel like we're drifting unmoored, as if life itself has slowly pulled away? The silence can be deafening, the stillness suffocating. And in that space of quiet, a question begins to echo: why me? Why this emptiness? Why this aloneness? But what if I told you this moment in your life, this season of isolation, wasn't a mistake? Not some punishment from the universe. Not a sign that you've been forgotten. What if it's something sacred? What if being alone isn't the end but the beginning? Carl Jung, the legendary depth psychologist and father of shadow work, didn't see solitude as something to run from. He saw it as a holy invitation. He believed that real transformation could only begin in the absence of noise, when all external distractions fall away, and you're forced to face yourself unfiltered and raw. According to Jung, these periods of solitude are not meaningless. They're not random. They are portals, gateways to self-knowledge, to awakening, to healing. And yet, when you're the one living it, it's easy to feel abandoned. You look around and see others laughing, connecting, thriving. Meanwhile, you sit in silence and wonder why you've been left behind. But what Jung understood, and what few dare to say, is this: people who are called to a deeper purpose often walk a lonelier road. Not because they're less worthy, but because the noise of the crowd would drown out the voice they need to hear, most their own. Loneliness is often mistaken for failure. But from a spiritual and psychological perspective, it's the soil in which growth begins. It's not rejection, it's refinement. Life is not pushing you away, it's pulling you inward. Think for a moment about the great minds who shaped the course of human history: the philosophers, the visionaries, the prophets, the healers. Their breakthroughs didn't come while they were surrounded by people. They came in the stillness. The Buddha found enlightenment under a tree in solitude. Jesus fasted alone in the desert for 40 days. Jung himself retreated from the world, diving into his own psyche and emerging with profound insights preserved in the Red Book. These weren't acts of isolation, they were sacred rituals of self-confrontation. Why? Because true transformation doesn't happen in comfort. You don't evolve while clinging to noise, to comfort, to applause. Growth happens when you sit with the silence, when you let the discomfort do its work, when the version of you that you've performed for the world begins to crumble, and something more honest rises from the dust. So, if you're in a season of aloneness right now, maybe you're not being punished. Maybe you're being prepared for a calling that can only be revealed in the quiet, a truth that only emerges when the world fades and you begin to hear yourself clearly. But here's the hard truth: most people won't make it. They'll run. They'll numb. They'll convince themselves they're broken, unloved, unworthy. They'll mistake solitude for rejection, and in doing so, avoid the very shadow work that could lead to transformation. Because the real danger of being alone isn't the loneliness itself, it's the belief that it's meaningless, that it will never end, that you're forgotten. But Jung would argue that this is the illusion. The silence isn't a void, it's a mirror. And if you have the courage to look, truly look, you'll begin to see not just your pain, but your purpose. When the distractions fall away, the endless scrolling, the shallow conversations, the noise you are left with yourself. And that's when the real work begins. Your thoughts get louder. The buried wounds begin to rise. The parts of yourself you've ignored, denied, or feared, they demand your attention. Yes, it can feel like drowning. But in truth, it's a baptism, a shedding of illusions, a sacred return to who you really are. So don't rush to escape it. Don't numb it. Honor it. Because in this quiet, in this ache, something holy is unfolding. And if you're willing to stay present with it, to endure it, to let it teach you, you may just come out on the other side, reborn. This is the moment most people run. They reach for their phones. They chase new relationships. They turn the volume back up on the world, on the noise, on anything that keeps them from sitting still. Silence becomes unbearable. And so, they escape it. But the few who don't, the ones who stay, who lean into the discomfort, who choose to listen rather than flee, they begin a journey Carl Jung called individuation. Individuation is not self-improvement. It's not about becoming better in the eyes of others. It's about becoming whole, fully, authentically you. Not the version of yourself shaped by expectation, tradition, or applause, but the raw, unfiltered self that existed before the world told you who to be. It is not an easy process. It often feels like dying because, in a way, it is. The masks begin to fall. The borrowed beliefs crack. The social armor that once protected you now weighs you down. You begin to realize how many parts of your identity were assembled to please others, to survive, to fit in. In solitude, all of that begins to unravel.
What remains is the naked self, and that's both terrifying and liberating. Why is solitude so painful?
Because it reveals the truth. Maybe the life you've built was never truly yours. Maybe the version of you the world celebrates is a role you've been playing so well for so long that you forgot it was a role. And when the distractions are gone, the subconscious begins to whisper. Then it begins to shout. Then it demands to be heard. But hear this. This isn't punishment. It's purification. The pain isn't meaningless. It's sacred. It's the fire that burns away illusion. It dissolves the fog. It strips everything false so that what's real can finally emerge. But only if you let it. Many people don't. They waste this sacred threshold. Instead of seeing solitude as the holy ground it is, they see it as exile. They convince themselves they've been left behind. They build identities around their bitterness. They curse the quiet, not knowing it was meant to bless them. But Jung offered a profound warning. Do not build your identity around your pain. Yes, suffering is a teacher, but it is not your home. You're meant to learn from it, not live in it. The more you resist the silence, the more it owns you. But when you surrender, when you sit with the silence, when you stop trying to escape it, begins to open. It begins to teach. And if you listen closely, you'll hear something extraordinary, your true voice. The one that's been buried beneath layers of performance and fear. The ones who emerge from solitude forever, changed, stronger, deeper, more self-aware, are not the ones who fought it. They are the ones who surrendered to it, who used the space to reflect, to unlearn, to remember who they were before the world taught them to forget. This is why solitude, though it feels like emptiness, is in truth a sacred threshold, a portal, a trial by fire. Not everyone crosses it, but those who do, they never return the same. When you are finally alone, truly undeniably alone, you step into a kind of psychological wilderness. No maps, no clapping, no distractions, just you. And that's the point. Because only in that stripped-down silence can the real conversation begin. You start to ask, who am I really? Not as a role, not as a name, not as a job title or a follower count, but as a soul. What do I believe apart from what I've been told? What do I desire, not for validation, but for meaning? Carl Jung believed that the unconscious, the vast unseen realm of our instincts, dreams, wounds, and truths, becomes more accessible when we're no longer distracted by the world. In that stillness, the unconscious begins to speak. Not always in words, but in images, sensations, memories. Sudden insights rising like smoke from a fire we didn't know was burning. These are not accidents. These are messages from you to you. And yet society tells us to keep moving, to avoid stillness, to numb discomfort, to avoid pain at all costs. But transformation isn't fast. It's not flashy. It's a sacred unfolding, like a seed breaking in the dark. First the silence, then the pressure. Then slowly something stirs. But here's the thing, it can't happen unless you cooperate. If you fight the solitude, if you numb it or run from it, the alchemy stalls. You stay stuck, repeating patterns, wearing masks, avoiding depth, forgetting who you are. This is where Jung's concept of shadow work becomes essential. Because when you sit with the silence long enough, your shadow begins to surface. Not to haunt you, but to heal you. The shadow is not some distant monstrous force. It's everything you've quietly shoved into the basement of your soul, unwanted traits. Buried emotions, truths you've pretended not to know. The jealousy you denied, the rage you suppressed, the fears you minimized, the grief you were too proud to grieve. But here's the truth. These pieces of you don't vanish just because you avoid them. They wait, patiently, in the dark. And when solitude arrives, real solitude, the inner shadows begin to stir, inviting us into the vulnerable but necessary work of shadow work. You might feel anger rise without a trigger. You might weep for reasons you can't explain. Old regrets bubble up. Shame you thought you buried resurfaces. This is the shadow stepping forward. And it's not here to destroy you. It's here to be seen. Carl Jung taught that integration of the shadow, meeting these parts with compassion rather than denial, is the path to becoming whole. And solitude, when met with courage, becomes the sacred arena where this integration takes place. You begin piece by painful piece to reclaim yourself. Not a polished version, but the honest one, the real one. Most people think happiness is about avoiding pain, but Jung understood something deeper. Peace is not the absence of pain, it's the presence of understanding. When you can sit with your pain, hear what it's trying to teach you, and no longer fear it, you reclaim power. The pain loses its grip. And then something begins to shift. You see things clearly. You recognize which relationships were built on guilt, obligation, or fear. You notice the places where you've betrayed yourself just to be accepted. You feel the exhaustion of a life spent performing, and something in you quietly says, enough. And for the first time, you start to reclaim your life, not the one others expect of you, but the one that feels like home. Yours. This is the kind of liberation solitude offers. It doesn't come fast. It doesn't come easy. But it comes honestly. In the quiet, You may rediscover long-forgotten passions, the ones that once set your heart on fire before the world told you to be realistic.
You may hear your inner child, not the wounded one,
But the curious, joyful, imaginative one calling out to you. You may remember dreams you buried to fit someone else's mold, and suddenly those dreams feel less like fantasies and more like necessities. The tragedy. Most people will never go this deep. They'll skim the surface of their own lives. They'll fill the silence with noise, mistaking motion for meaning. They'll avoid solitude like a plague, never realizing it's the very door to their healing. But if solitude has found you even against your will, consider that it may be a divine invitation, not to comfort, but to truth. And truth, while beautiful, can also be brutal. It strips, it reveals. It doesn't flatter, but it frees. It removes the false so the real can rise. That's why those who walk through the fire of solitude don't come out louder, they come out clearer. Their strength isn't showy. It's rooted, quiet, unshakable. They no longer need applause because they've learned to approve of themselves. They no longer crave attention because they've made peace with being unseen. And they don't fear being misunderstood because they'd rather be authentic than accepted. This is the gift of solitude. But make no mistake, it's not a gift that's handed to you. You have to earn it. You have to sit through the nights when the silence feels like it might swallow you. You have to face the thoughts that make your chest tighten. You have to cry, sometimes rage, sometimes break. And then, only then, something begins to take shape inside you. Something new. Something unshakable. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. But those who do, who face themselves not once, but again and again, with honesty and humility, become something rare. They become whole." So if you're in a season of solitude, don't rush to escape it. Don't drown it in noise. Don't numb it with distraction. Instead, pause. Breathe. Listen. Because this space, as empty as it seems, is fertile ground for something extraordinary. Something no one else can give you a deep, unshakable relationship with yourself. And that's what solitude is really about. Not isolation, not punishment, but reunion. A reunion with the person you were always meant to become. There is a sacred fire hidden within solitude. One that doesn't burn to destroy, but to refine. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, at times it may feel like suffering. But it's not meant to punish you. Solitude is a crucible, and only those who dare to step into its heat will emerge transformed. When all the roles fall away, when the applause fades, when the distractions are gone, something raw remains. You. Not the version you show the world, not the polished identity you've curated to win approval or blend in, but the unfiltered, vulnerable, quietly powerful self, the one that's been waiting for a place to breathe. That version of you doesn't scream for attention. It whispers for honesty. Jung didn't see this unraveling as a breakdown. He saw it as the very essence of life's journey, a sacred confrontation. Again and again, life pushes us toward these encounters with the unconscious, that vast inner realm filled with our deepest instincts, forgotten dreams, raw emotions, and buried truths. But the door to that inner world doesn't open in noise. It opens in silence, in solitude, in those long, heavy moments when it feels like the world has forgotten you, when invitations stop coming, when your phone stays still, when laughter feels distant and the quiet feels suffocating. That's when you are closest to something sacred. At first, it doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like grief, like loss. But if you have the courage to sit with that ache, you'll find that beneath it lies a holy invitation to become more whole, more honest, more aligned with who you truly are. Most people misunderstand isolation. They see it through the lens of social failure, of being unwanted. But the truth is, especially when solitude arrives uninvited, it often signals the beginning of an inner rite of passage, a spiritual turning point the soul desperately needs even as the ego resists it. Think of it like the seasons. No one resents the stillness of winter. We understand that beneath the frozen surface, something is happening. Roots are growing deeper. The soil is resting. Life is preparing itself for spring. Your solitude is no different. Outwardly, it may look like nothing is changing, but inside you, something massive is shifting. This is why spiritual traditions across the world, from Buddhist monks in their mountain temples, to Christian mystics in desert caves, to Sufi poets dancing in silence, hold solitude in such sacred regard. Because in silence, in retreat, in stillness, the soul begins to remember its way home. But make no mistake, this isn't passive. You don't just sit in silence, waiting for magic to happen. You engage with yourself honestly, courageously, compassionately. You listen to what you've avoided. You feel what you've numbed. You sit with the ache not as a victim, but as a seeker. And in doing so, something profound begins to shift. The parts of you you've spent a lifetime hiding, your fears, your flaws, your regrets, start to feel less like enemies and more like messengers. You realize they weren't trying to shame you. They were trying to guide you back to wholeness. This is the soul of Jung's concept of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are by integrating all the parts of yourself, even the ones you once rejected. The goal isn't to become perfect. The goal is to become whole, to stand in the tension of your contradictions, your shadow and your light, and say, "This is me, entire, undivided." That kind of self-acceptance isn't forged in the crowd. It isn't born from applause. It's carved in the fire of solitude. It demands stillness. It demands discomfort. It demands courage. But we live in a culture that tells us discomfort is failure, that pain must be medicated, silenced, rushed, that healing should be quick and clean and Instagram-worthy. But real healing, the kind that rewrites your soul, is messy. It's full of grief and rage and unexpected beauty. It doesn't happen on a timeline. It doesn't perform for an audience. It must be honored. And that's what solitude teaches if you let it. Patience, presence, depth. Time slows. You stop sprinting through life, checking boxes and chasing validation. You start to notice your breath, your thoughts, the way emotion rises like waves and falls again. You begin to realize how much noise you've been living with, and slowly, softly, you begin to remember what it's like to just be with yourself. And that presence, that is the birthplace of transformation. Because it's here in this sacred quiet, you begin to forgive. Not just others, but yourself. You let go of the stories that have kept you stuck. I'm not enough. I'm too broken. No one will ever truly understand me. These stories begin to lose their grip. They unravel under the light of your attention, and in their place comes something new. You begin to dream again, not dreams of status or performance, but dreams that feel true. You ask new questions. What does a meaningful life look like for me? What kind of energy do I want to bring into the world? Who am I? when no one is watching. And in answering those questions, something miraculous happens. You begin to rewrite the script of your life, not the script handed to you by family culture, fear, or expectation, but a story authored by the truest part of you, not based on expectation, but rooted in truth, your truth. That sacred inner compass the world taught you to silence. Solitude gives you the space to come home to yourself, to remember what really matters, to realign not with what looks impressive, but with what feels real. But make no mistake, this is sacred work. And sacred work is never easy. It will ask everything of you. It will break illusions, burn attachments, and test your willingness to remain when every part of you wants to run. That's why most don't choose it. Many will spend their entire lives running not toward anything in particular, just away. Away from stillness, away from silence, away from the ache just beneath the surface. They'll fill their calendars, scroll endlessly, chase highs, and settle for relationships that touch the body but not the soul. But the ones who stop running, who sit down in the fire and say, "Let it burn what it must," those people become something rare. They become steady, grounded, free, not because life stopped hurting, but because they stopped hiding. They still feel pain. They still long for connection, but they carry within them a calm that doesn't come from avoidance. It comes from endurance, from walking through the storm with open eyes and an open heart. This is the alchemy of solitude, not a punishment, but a sacred passage, a slow, holy burning away of what is false, a refinement of the soul. And once you've walked through it, you don't come out brighter, you come out truer. You carry the wisdom of fire. You become a lighthouse, still, silent, unmistakably alive. And then one day, almost without notice, something shifts. There's no thunderclap, no divine announcement, just a subtle knowing the season has changed. The silence that once suffocated you now feels sacred. The loneliness that once tore you apart now feels like peace. And in that stillness you realize you've made it through. But now comes the next chapter, the one no one talks about. Re-entry. Most people think once you've faced yourself in solitude, you just pick up life where you left off. Resume the routines. Rejoin the crowd. Plug back into the world. But here's the truth. You don't return the same. And the world doesn't meet you the same way. You've changed. And now comes the real work, integrating that inner transformation into an outer life. Jung understood this intimately. He taught that individuation, the psychological and spiritual process of becoming your whole authentic self, isn't complete until it's lived, until it's expressed in action, in relationships, in the world. Because transformation that stays locked inside you isn't transformation. It's potential, and potential must become embodiment. This part is messy, because when you've gone deep within, your values shift. Things that once thrilled you now feel hollow. Conversations that once entertained you now feel empty. The roles you used to play feel tight, constrictive, like clothes you've outgrown. And suddenly, the life you worked so hard to build feels foreign. You begin to crave depth, sincerity, sacredness. But this dissonance is part of the process. You may feel like a stranger in your own home, in your own circle. Some people will sense the change in you and celebrate it. Others won't understand. Some may feel threatened, trying to pull you back into the version of you they were comfortable with. But remember this: you don't owe the world the version of you that no longer exists. Your return from solitude is not about blending in. It's about showing up as you truly are, fully, unapologetically, and with grace. Not with arrogance, not with sermons, but with quiet, embodied truth. You begin to speak less, but when you do, your words carry weight. You move with intention. You choose relationships not from fear or habit, but from resonance. You no longer say yes to avoid discomfort. You say no because your boundaries have become sacred ground. You no longer abandon yourself for approval because you've finally become someone you refuse to abandon. And that kind of loyalty to the self, it's unshakable. This inner strength doesn't shout. It doesn't dominate. But it's felt in your presence, in your calm, in the way you hold space for others without losing yourself in the process. And slowly, almost naturally, something begins to shift outside you too. You start to attract what's meant for you. Relationships that don't require performance but invite authenticity. Connections that don't demand sacrifice but welcome truth. Opportunities that don't exploit but align. Because when you've done the inner work, your outer life begins to reflect it, not perfectly, not instantly, but undeniably. The world begins to reorganize itself around the energy you now carry. And this is what it means to return from the fire. Not scorched, but refined. Not broken, but made whole. And then something beautiful begins to happen. Opportunities arise, not the kind that dazzle the world, but the kind that resonate with your deeper values. Slowly, quietly, your outer life starts to reflect your inner truth. Not overnight, not without resistance, but steadily like dawn chasing away the night. And when challenges return, and they will, you meet them differently. Discomfort no longer frightens you. You've sat with your shadow. You've walked through your wilderness. You've made peace with the silence most people fear. And now when life wavers, you know how to come back to yourself. That is your power. Because in many ways, solitude teaches you the most radical lesson of all: how to become your own home. And when you carry that kind of inner rootedness, the storms of life no longer uproot you. Rejection stings less. Failure becomes feedback, not finality. Silence becomes sanctuary, not suffering. You've learned how to speak gently to yourself in the quiet. But perhaps the most profound shift is what you begin to carry for others. You carry presence, and in a world addicted to speed, noise, and shallow connection, presence is a sacred medicine. You're no longer chasing approval. You don't need to perform. You're not trying to prove your worth because you found it alone in the dark. And now, without forcing it, your stillness becomes a refuge for others. You notice when someone is hurting, even if they smile through it. You listen differently, not waiting to respond, but truly hearing. You offer space instead of solutions, questions instead of assumptions, silence instead of pressure. And without preaching a word, you become a mirror, a reminder that they too have an inner life, a voice, a soul that's waiting to be heard. This is how solitude becomes service, not through loud declarations or self-help slogans, but through embodiment, through the quiet light of someone who has suffered, softened, and survived. Your presence becomes permission, a signal that it's safe to slow down, to go inward, to feel, to heal. And yet, even as you begin to serve the world in this new way, you never forget where it all began. You return to your solitude not out of sorrow, but out of reverence. It becomes your rhythm, your sanctuary, a sacred practice, because the noise will return. The world will demand more. Growth doesn't stop, and the path of self-discovery has no finish line. But now, you know the way back. You've walked through fire and didn't burn, you were refined. You've sat in the silence and heard your soul whisper truths the world could never give you. And now that memory lives inside you. A compass, a sacred ember that always points you back to what matters most. Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." And now you are awake. Not in the loud, dramatic way the world likes to advertise, but in a quiet, grounded way. In a way that cannot be shaken. You know what peace feels like because you've earned it. You know what self-respect tastes like because you built it from the inside out. And you know what it means to stand alone, not because you have to, but because now you can. So you walk through the world differently now. Not separate from it, but no longer consumed by it. You carry your solitude with you, not as a wound, but as wisdom. You belong to yourself now. And from that place, everything changes. Because the real gift of solitude was never escape. It was embodiment. The sacred realization that you were never broken, never behind, never forgotten. You were simply being carved into something deeper. And now, you're not going back to who you were. You're moving forward as who you've finally become.